The rain slammed against the cracked pavement, echoing like shattered glass in Emily's mind. She staggered forward, clutching her chest as if holding the pieces of her broken courage together. Emily said, "Why now? Why like this?" Her voice cracked, swallowed by the storm. The city lights blurred into streaks, painting the world in chaos as her body trembled. She had spent years staying invisible, working quietly in an office where no one noticed her effort, no one cared about her dreams. Now, betrayed by those she trusted most, her heart thundered like a war drum. Emily said, "I gave everything, and still I was nothing to them." The reflection of her soaked figure in the shop window revealed more than just exhaustion. It revealed a woman trapped in silence for far too long. Thunder roared above, shaking her into awareness. Her knees weakened, but she refused to fall. Emily whispered, "I won't break. Not again." In that storm-soaked moment, her pain was undeniable. But beneath it all, something fierce flickered. A spark fighting to survive in the ruins of defeat. The storm eased but left the streets drowned in silence. Emily walked slowly, her soaked shoes squeaking with each step. Her mind replayed the cruel laughter from earlier, when colleagues exposed her work as their own, mocking her quiet nature. Emily muttered, "I gave them everything." Her eyes searched the ground, avoiding the faces of strangers passing by. Their umbrellas shielded them, while she carried the weight of betrayal alone. A flash of memory struck her, long nights spent correcting reports, her effort unseen, only to be erased by voices louder than hers. She tightened her grip on her coat, feeling her nails dig into her skin. The city hummed faintly, indifferent to her collapse. Emily whispered, "They think I'm invisible." The thought pierced her chest deeper than the storm had. Yet, in that void of silence, she felt her breath slowing, anger replacing despair. The shadows of the street stretched long before her, daring her to step into them with something stronger than tears. Emily turned a corner, her breath sharp against the cold air. The memory of her manager's smirk burned into her mind. He had said, "You'll never rise above your silence." His words repeated like poison. Emily said, "I stayed quiet to keep peace." Her chest heaved, recalling the sarcastic whispers behind her back, the way her colleagues used her kindness as a weapon. She paused beneath a flickering streetlight, the hum echoing like the buzz of judgment she carried daily. Emily whispered, "They see me as weak." A bitter laugh escaped her lips, surprising even herself. The world blurred again with tears, but this time her fists tightened faster. She wiped her face with the back of her sleeve, smearing rain and makeup alike. The night felt like a stage, and she stood alone in its spotlight. She knew she had been broken many times, yet she was still here, walking. Emily whispered, "Maybe silence is strength, but not tonight." Her footsteps quickened as if running from her own memories. She reached the small park near her apartment, where benches glistened with rain and shadows stretched like silent witnesses. Emily collapsed onto the wet bench, her shoulders heaving. Emily said, "I gave them my years, and they gave me nothing." Her voice cracked into the night. She remembered her childhood, the constant echoes of relatives reminding her she was ordinary. The sting of those words burned again. Her reflection wavered in a puddle before her, distorted and ghost-like. Emily whispered, "Maybe they were right." A sharp wind cut across her face, but she didn't flinch. The park's silence pressed heavy on her chest, yet she couldn't stop the surge of bitterness in her veins. Emily leaned forward, elbows digging into her knees, eyes narrowed. "Or maybe they were wrong," she whispered, a trembling defiance rising with her breath. The rain slowed to a drizzle, and the night grew quieter. Emily's gaze lifted from the puddle to the horizon, where the faint glow of dawn hinted at change. Her body ached, yet her mind refused to rest. Emily whispered, "I can't keep living like this." She stood slowly, legs stiff but unbroken, water dripping from her coat. The weight of betrayal pressed on her shoulders, but she inhaled deeply, letting the sharp air cut through her lungs. For the first time that night, she didn't look down, she looked ahead. Emily said, "If they see me as nothing, then I'll prove them wrong." Her jaw tightened, the faintest spark lighting her eyes. The storm had tried to bury her, but the flicker inside had not been extinguished. The night still held darkness, but in her chest, something new stirred, something stronger than silence. The morning arrived with pale light spilling through Emily's curtains, though she hardly noticed it. Her body moved on instinct, pulling herself into work clothes that still carried the scent of rain. The office loomed before her like a prison, glass walls reflecting a life she did not want. Emily whispered, "Another day of pretending." Inside, the buzz of voices mocked her silence, each laugh a reminder of the betrayal she carried. She passed her colleagues without a glance, their eyes sliding over her as if she didn't exist. Emily said, "Let them look away. I'm still here." She sat at her desk, fingers hovering over the keyboard, her reflection caught in the black screen. It stared back at her with hollow defiance. The world spun in its routine, but her heart raged. She could feel the storm inside her demanding a place in this world of polished lies. Emily clenched her jaw, whispering, "I won't let them erase me again." Emily's manager, Robert, leaned casually against her desk, his smirk sharp as a blade. He was a 42-year-old man, tall and broad, with a crisp suit that masked his arrogance. He said, "I need the reports again, since yours weren't exactly presentable." The words dug deep, though his voice was calm. Emily's hands tightened on the keyboard, her knuckles pale. She wanted to scream that it was her work he stole, that her effort had kept his praise alive. But the silence clung to her throat like chains. Robert tilted his head, waiting for her obedience. Emily whispered, "Yes, I'll fix them." The lie tasted bitter. She felt the weight of injustice heavier than the storm the night before. Her breath came sharp, every word he spoke a reminder of her place in his game. She muttered, "You'll see, Robert. One day you'll see." At the corner of the office, Emily's colleague Daniel observed quietly. He was a 34-year-old man, lean, dressed simply in rolled sleeves and glasses, his presence steady yet unassuming. He had seen Robert's games before, though he rarely spoke of them. Daniel walked over, his voice low but edged with truth. "Daniel said, he takes because you let him." Emily's chest tightened, stung by the bluntness. She muttered, "What else can I do? They'll crush me if I speak." Daniel leaned closer, his gaze unwavering. Daniel said, "Maybe silence isn't peace. Maybe it's surrender." His words cut through her excuses like a blade. Emily lowered her eyes, shame and defiance warring in her veins. Daniel didn't offer comfort, only truth. He walked away without waiting for her reply, leaving her drowning in his words. Emily whispered, "Maybe he's right, or maybe he doesn't understand." The hours dragged like heavy chains, each keystroke pulling Emily deeper into the pit of invisibility. Around her, laughter rose from her colleague's corner, their voices mocking, their eyes glancing toward her like predators circling prey. Emily pressed her lips tight, the sound drilling into her skull. She remembered the storm, the whispers of defiance she had dared to breathe, and now she felt it slipping away, under the suffocating weight of the office walls. Emily whispered, "I can't let them win." She closed her eyes for a moment, hearing Daniel's words replay. "Silence isn't peace. Silence is surrender." Her jaw ached from clenching, her fingers trembling as they typed faster. The anger burned hotter than shame, rising from her chest to her throat. Emily muttered, "If I'm invisible, then I'll make them see me." By evening, the office emptied, leaving Emily surrounded by silence at last. The glow of her monitor lit her face, sharp and pale against the darkness. She stared at the unfinished report, heart pounding with defiance. Emily whispered, "No more erasing me." She poured herself into the work, each keystroke a rebellion, every line a vow that her voice would no longer be stolen. The clock ticked past midnight, but she did not stop. Her reflection in the screen was no longer hollow, it was fierce, alive. Emily said, "I will rise from this, even if it breaks me first." Her chest burned with exhaustion, but her spirit felt lit for the first time in years. Outside the windows, the city's neon shimmered, no longer indifferent, it felt like it was waiting. waiting for her to step into its light. The conference room hummed with recycled air and shallow praise, as Robert clicked through slides built from Emily's work. Emily said, "Those projections were mine," but her voice barely reached the glass wall. Robert said, "Team effort," and smiled at the executives. Heat rose in her throat as the chart she refined for weeks drew nods that skipped past her. Daniel watched from the back, arms folded, eyes steady like a mirror. Emily whispered, "I did this," and her pulse thudded against the chair. Robert said, "Our strategy is originality," and the room laughed on cue. She pictured the storm, the vows made under neon rain, and felt them thinning. Daniel caught her gaze and inclined his head as if to say, "Keep breathing." Emily said, "I won't vanish," and her fingers dug crescents into her notebook. The meeting moved on like a tide obeying a moon that never looked down. The praise email arrived before lunch, and Robert's name bloomed in bold. Emily read it twice, then a third time, each pass scraping her nerves raw. Emily said, "He's building a throne for my hours." She paced to the break room, the hum of the fridge like a taunt. Daniel poured stale coffee, eyes on her, not unkind. Daniel said, "Bring proof, not rage." She bristled, wounded by the truth inside the sting. Emily said, "Proof is all I have left," and set her jaw. He nodded once, offering no rescue, only a path. Daniel said, "If you speak, own the room or wait until you can." The fluorescent lights flickered, and she felt their cheapness on her skin. Emily whispered, "Then I'll gather everything," and the plan pressed a steady beat into her ribs. Emily moved like a whisper through version histories and audit logs, a ghost in a maze of timestamps. Screens stacked with evidence, each data brick in a wall she could stand on. Emily said, "Line by line they will see." She screen-captured edits, pinned emails, and printed the crucial trail. The printer coughed out pages that smelled like heat and resolve. She drafted a message to leadership and froze at the subject line. Emily whispered, "I am not small," and let the words wait. The memory of childhood cautions pressed against her courage. Daniel's voice drifted back, a flint in the dark. Daniel said, "Bring proof," and the cursor blinked like a metronome. Emily saved a folder named after her own name, and the act felt like a quiet claim. The corridor tightened when Robert appeared, blocking the elevator with a pleasant grin that never reached his eyes. Robert said, "Team players don't hoard credit," as if the line were a rule, etched in marble. Emily said, "Team players don't steal it," and felt her voice land true. His jaw twitched, then relaxed into charm like a mask snapped into place. Robert said, "Careful with stories that harm your future." The threat wore a silk tie and cologne. Emily held the folder against her ribs and refused to step back. The elevator chimed, and Daniel turned the corner, not stopping, only seeing. Daniel said, "You good?" without breaking stride. Emily said, "I'm done being erased," and pressed the call button with steady fingers. By night, Emily returned to her desk and found access denied where her work once lived. The error message pulsed like a bruise. Emily said, "Of course he locked the door I built." Panic surged, then steadied under a colder light. She opened backups, old drafts, mirrored notes, every breadcrumb she had kept in her quiet way. Emily whispered, "You cannot salt a field that already holds seeds." She documented the lockouts and timestamps with clinical care. Daniel messaged a single word that felt like a hand on a ledge. Daniel said, "Proceed." Emily breathed in, long and grounding. She sent a meeting request to leadership and attached the ledger of truth. Emily said, "I choose the fight," and the night held its breath around her. Emily walked into the leadership meeting, with her folder pressed to her chest, but the moment she opened her mouth, her words collided with cold indifference. The directors glanced at her documents, then at Robert, who smiled as though rehearsed. Emily said, "This is my work." Her voice quivered, but landed sharp. Robert said, "We appreciate enthusiasm, but the team effort speaks louder." Their silence was heavier than thunder, their eyes like locked doors. Emily's pulse pounded, her throat closing as she searched for Daniel in the room, but his seat was empty. She whispered, "Am I standing alone?" The chairwoman sighed, her pen tapping against the table like a clock marking her futility. Emily said, "I cannot be erased again," though the tremble in her jaw betrayed the ache of doubt. She left the room before tears could betray her resolve, her folder clutched like a shield against the hollow applause behind her. The hallway outside the meeting felt endless, the sound of her heels echoing like accusations. Emily said, "They didn't even listen," her breath shallow, each step heavier. She reached the glass doors and saw her reflection staring back, tired, small, almost ghost-like. A receptionist looked up briefly and returned to her phone, indifferent. Emily pressed her forehead against the glass, whispering, "Am I nothing but noise to them?" Memories surged. Childhood dinners where her voice was drowned by louder ones. Classrooms where her hand raised unnoticed. The weight of years pressed down with ruthless clarity. She slid into a chair near the lobby, her folder on her lap, the ink smudged from her grip. Emily whispered, "They made me believe I was weak." The city outside moved on, cars rushing, pedestrians laughing, a whole world unaware of her storm. Daniel found her in the lobby, his expression steady but not softened. He stood near, arms crossed, eyes like a mirror she hated facing. Daniel said, "You expected them to hand you victory?" Emily shook her head, words caught in her throat. Emily said, "I expected them to hear truth." Daniel leaned closer, voice low. Daniel said, "Truth without power is just a whisper." His bluntness sliced but left clarity in its wake. She stared at him, anger flaring, shame pulling at her ribs. Emily whispered, "Then I failed." Daniel shook his head, turning to leave. Daniel said, "You've begun. Don't confuse beginning with defeat." His footsteps echoed away, leaving her clutching the folder tighter, the words ringing like a challenge. She whispered, "Don't confuse beginning with defeat," repeating it like a fragile mantra as the emptiness of the lobby pressed against her lungs. Emily stepped outside into the rush of the city, the air biting colder than she remembered. The crowd pressed around her, faces blurring, voices rising like waves crashing. She moved through them, shoulders hunched, folder clutched to her chest. Emily said, "They'll forget me by tomorrow." The wind cut against her cheeks, sharp as truth. She found a bench beneath a flickering streetlight, the noise of traffic a relentless drum. She dropped the folder beside her and buried her face in her hands. Emily whispered, "I'm not strong enough." For the first time in years, she let the sobs come, heavy, uncontrolled, filling the space she always tried to keep silent. Her tears dropped onto the ink of her notes, smearing proof into ghosts. The city didn't stop, didn't bend to her storm. Emily said, "I am nothing," her voice breaking into the hum of the world. The night stretched heavy, the city lights distant as Emily returned to her small apartment. She dropped the folder on the floor, its pages spilling like wounded birds. She stood at the window, staring at the skyline, each tower a reminder of what she could never reach. Emily whispered, "I fought and I lost." Her shoulders sagged as though the storm had finally broken her spine. She sank to the floor, knees drawn to her chest, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence like a cruel reminder of life, moving forward. Shadows climbed the walls, and for the first time, she wondered if her fight had been foolish all along. Emily said, "Maybe they were right," her voice fragile, fractured. The night offered no answer, only silence, and for a long moment, she felt like a ghost, fading within her own home. The morning sun cut through Emily's blinds, sharp and unkind. She sat at the table surrounded by torn pages from her folder, every proof scattered like fallen leaves. Her body slumped, but her eyes caught on one overlooked email thread. Emily said, "Wait." The subject line bore her name, attached to drafts clearly marked with her initials. Her pulse quickened as she opened file after file, each stamped with edits no one could deny. Emily whispered, "He missed this." A spark lit her chest, fragile yet real. The truth she thought erased still lived, tucked inside the system Robert hadn't controlled. She stacked the papers, each one a weapon of clarity. Emily said, I am not erased, her jaw tightening. The storm that had broken her now felt like fuel. She leaned back, air sharp in her lungs, whispering, This isn't over, not yet. Emily marched back into the office with a steadiness she hadn't felt in years. The weight of despair had burned away, leaving steel in her veins. She dropped the stack of papers on her desk, each page like thunder against the quiet office hum. Emily whispered, Not invisible anymore. Daniel appeared at her side, brow raised. Daniel said, Found something? She met his eyes, holding the proof out to him. He scanned the pages, his lips pressing thin, then looked back at her with a flicker of respect. Daniel said, That will cut deep. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from the clarity of purpose. Emily whispered, Then let it bleed. She sat straighter, the monitor glow reflecting determination instead of defeat. For the first time, the walls of her cubicle felt less like a cage and more like a starting line. Robert stood at the head of the weekly team meeting, his voice smooth and polished, basking in the glow of false credit once more. Emily felt her chest tighten, but this time she didn't shrink. She rose from her chair, the Russell drawing eyes. Emily said, These projections you're praising, those are mine. Silence spread like fire through the room. Robert's smile faltered, though only for a second. He said, We've discussed this already. Emily placed the stack of proof on the table, her hands steady. Emily whispered, Not like this. Papers spread under curious eyes, dates, initials, every mark undeniable. Colleagues leaned forward, murmurs stirring. Her pulse pounded, but her spine held straight. Emily said, Erase me if you can. The silence was no longer heavy, it was sharp, cutting in her favor. The room broke into murmurs. Papers passed hand to hand, proof undeniable. Robert's charm cracked, his jaw clenched, eyes narrowing as if searching for escape. Emily felt her fear melting into fire. Daniel said from across the room, Truth has a way of cutting through lies. The words anchored her, steadying her stance. Robert said, This is insubordination. Emily said, This is truth. Her voice carried further than she thought possible, bouncing against glass walls that once muted her. For the first time she didn't feel small in the space. She felt immense, filling it with the weight of her defiance. The colleagues who once ignored her now looked at her with something closer to recognition. Emily whispered, I have a voice, and this time it didn't tremble. The meeting ended in uneasy silence. Robert's power cracked though not broken. Emily walked out, folder light in her arms, her steps steady. The storm within her no longer felt like destruction. It felt like rebirth. She whispered, I am not who I was. Daniel caught up, his voice blunt but steady. Daniel said, You drew blood today. Emily met his gaze, breath even. Emily said, It's only the beginning. For the first time, she believed her own words. Outside the sun hung low, painting the skyline gold. The air felt sharper, alive, as though the city itself had turned to witness her rise. She whispered, They will see me now, not as a hope, but as a vow. The faintest smile pulled at her lips as she walked into the noise of the streets, no longer drowned, but heard. The leadership meeting reconvened, and tension clung to the air like smoke. Emily entered, folder in hand, her heart steady, though her palms burned with heat. Robert stood tall at the head of the table, his smirk rehearsed. Robert said, We won't tolerate disruptions. Emily laid the folder down, papers fanning like blades. Emily said, Disruption is truth refusing to die. The executives shifted uncomfortably, eyes scanning the damning documents. Robert laughed, brittle at the edges. Robert said, She twists things. Emily pointed to her initials, her timestamps, her irrefutable marks. Emily whispered, You erased me, but you couldn't erase proof. The silence thickened, every eye now pressing on Robert instead of her. Emily felt her spine straighten, the storm inside finding its final shape. Robert slammed his palm against the table, his mask slipping into rage. Robert said, "You think you can undo me with scraps of paper?" His voice cut sharp, but Emily did not flinch. Emily said, "I don't need to undo you. You undo yourself." His fury fed the silence, making the room shrink around him. Executives leaned back watching the storm unravel. Daniel, seated at the side, leaned forward slightly, his eyes steady on Emily, a silent anchor. Emily's pulse roared, but her words came clear. Emily whispered, "I stayed quiet for years. Today I speak." Robert's glare burned, yet the weight of truth pressed heavier. For the first time she wasn't the shadow, he was. Emily lifted one final piece of proof, the email with Robert's edits layered directly over hers. Gasps rippled as the truth stared from the projection screen. Emily said, "This is my voice stolen, and signed as his." Robert's lips parted, but no words came. His silence was louder than any denial. Daniel said, "Evidence doesn't lie," his tone blunt, echoing the weight of judgment. Emily's chest heaved, but for once it was with release, not despair. Her gaze swept the room and found no dismissal, only uneasy acknowledgement. Emily whispered, "You see me now." The storm that once drowned her now carried her voice forward, and it filled the room until Robert seemed smaller, weaker, fading. The chairwoman leaned forward, her pen finally still, her eyes fixed on Robert. The weight of leadership shifted palpably in the air. Emily felt the moment stretching like a held breath. Robert said, "This is manipulation." His voice cracked, breaking his facade. The chairwoman's reply was colder than steel. She said, "Or perhaps it is exposure." Murmurs circled the table. The tide turned. Emily whispered, "He cannot cage me anymore," her hand resting lightly on her folder, no longer gripping in fear. Daniel's gaze met hers from across the table, the faintest nod passing between them. Emily felt the release of chains she'd carried all her life. The meeting ended not with applause, but with silence thick as stone. Robert walked out first, shoulders rigid, his empire cracked. Emily remained, her hand steady on the table, her breath slow and full. Daniel approached, his tone as blunt as ever but softer in its truth. Daniel said, "You didn't just survive, you shifted the ground." Emily looked up, her eyes carrying both exhaustion and fire. Emily said, "I fought for my voice, and I will not give it back." The city outside gleamed through the glass, towers lit like beacons instead of prisons. For the first time, the storm inside her was not chaos. It was power, reshaped into light. Emily whispered, "I am not invisible. Not anymore." The night air was cool as Emily stepped into the city streets, the chaos of the day fading into a steady hum around her. She carried no folder, no proof, only the weight of her own voice, now unshaken. Emily whispered, "I stood, and I did not fall." Each step echoed differently than before, lighter, surer, as though the ground itself acknowledged her. She no longer felt like a shadow in the crowd. Instead, the rhythm of her stride carried strength. She thought of Robert's silence, of Daniel's quiet nod, and of her own courage forged in storms. Emily said, "This is the beginning of me." The city lights flickered like stars brought down to earth, and for the first time they seemed to shine for her. Emily reached the small park where storms once found her, collapsed on a bench. Tonight, the same bench waited, but she did not sit. She stood tall, gazing at the puddles now calm under streetlights. Emily whispered, "I was broken here, but I rose here too." Her reflection stared back from the water, no longer fractured but whole. She traced her journey in silence, the betrayals, the nights of doubt, the tears that felt endless. Yet tonight, the echoes of defeat no longer held her. Emily said, "Strength is not silence. Strength is voice." The trees rustled gently as if in agreement, and the night air carried her vow outward like a song. The next morning, Emily returned to the office not as the woman who hid in corners, but as one who claimed her space. Colleagues glanced her way, no longer dismissing, no longer blind. Emily said, "They see me now." She walked to her desk with steady steps, sat, and powered on her computer with hands that no longer trembled. The hum of voices carried differently, softened by awareness. Daniel passed by, pausing only long enough to meet her eyes. Daniel said, "Keep walking forward." She nodded once, not in thanks but in agreement. The office no longer felt like a cage. It was only walls, and walls could not contain her anymore. At lunch, Emily stood near the window, overlooking the city that once seemed indifferent. Today, the skyline looked different, less like walls, and more like a horizon. Emily whispered, "This is only the first battle." She pressed her palm against the glass, feeling the hum of the world alive on the other side. She thought of others who, like her, lived unseen, silenced by louder voices. Emily said, "I'll make space for them too." The vow rooted itself deeply, stronger than defiance, larger than survival. It was purpose. The reflection staring back was no longer the woman of storms, but of light forged through them. That evening, Emily walked home under the fading sun, the sky painted in streaks of orange and violet. The storm of her past no longer haunted her, it had shaped her. She paused at a corner, looking up at the horizon, her breath steady. Emily whispered, "I am not invisible, I am here." The words felt like a seal, closing one chapter and opening another. The crowd moved around her, but this time she wasn't lost among them. She was distinct, present, undeniable. Emily said, "And I will not fade again." With quiet strength, she stepped forward, carrying her vow into tomorrow, her journey no longer of survival, but of becoming.